Welcome to the third of the mini lectures in 7505 NSC Project Management. In this lecture we're going to be talking about project selection and portfolio management. What do we mean by portfolio? It's just a collection of projects. It's as simple as that. But the important thing about project selection and portfolio management, in the earlier mini lectures we've spoken about project failure and success. And very often project failure often starts with selecting the wrong projects. That is, an organisation decides to get a new piece of equipment in and it's set up as a project to introduce it, and a contractor wins the contract to provide that. So from both the customer and contractor side, they can be actually quite dangerous things. And the Boeing 787 is a classic example of this, where the airlines said that's the sort of aircraft that we want and built their plans on that aircraft, and Boeing also came up with a very innovative aeroplane, but they had difficulty in actually executing the production of the aircraft, so that it ended up going way over budget, over schedule, and the airlines ended up getting their product late, and that affected a lot of them to different extents. So project selection and portfolio management can be a most important part of our project management. So in this one we're going to describe the 6 criteria in project selection, and including the screening model. We're going to be explaining the employment of checklists, basic and complex scoring models, such as the analytic hierarchy process. We're going to be explaining and applying the various financial tools, such as the efficient frontier and risk return models. And we're going to be explaining how project portfolio management is optimised. That is, when we pick a project, how does it fit in with all the other projects that we're running? That is, does it align pretty much with what we've got, or does it vary quite significantly? And these are important. So in this lecture itself, what we're going to be doing is going through the analytic tools, and in the actual course itself, you'll be learning to apply these tools and do calculations, so that this will give you a skill that you can use very much in later life. Project selection itself. How do we go about making sure we pick the right project for our organisation? And for example, a classic one that we have had in Australia and outside aviation was the Queensland Department of Health. They decided that there were too many people involved in doing their payroll for all their hospitals across the state. And they went out and said, we want a system, a software system, that does a lot of the work that's been done by humans in the past to get the cost of processing pay down. And you would think that would be relatively simple. But what we know is it went from being a $120 million project to a $1.2 billion project because of problems. And part of it went back to the project selection itself. People did not understand fully what they were taking on. So let's take a look. We know that organisations use models to help select the projects that best fit their business needs. And they have to select the project from all the opportunities that are available. Now, that sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? You'd say every organisation does that. You'd absolutely be amazed if you found the number of organisations that really don't use very good models in their project selection. So this course is going to tell you as to how it's done. And if you can provide that advice in a future job, you'll be a very valued person. And the one thing is that the models that we use have got to have certain qualities to help screen out the projects, because there's a whole range of things we can look at, but one of them is going to be best, and we want to have the winner. And we'll be discussing as to making sure that we've got a model that has realism, that is, it fits in with the organisational objectives and the constraints. It's got a capability where it can respond to a range of conditions. That is, we just don't want one model for one project. We want a model that can be used across multiple projects. We've got flexibility. It can be adapted to accommodate changes. Organisations never operate in a static environment. Things are always changing, and what we want is a model that can actually accommodate changes to the environment which an organisation operates in. We want ease of use straight away. A model that takes a huge amount of analysis so that we eventually get paralysis, that's absolutely going to be a barrier in our path. So we want something that's simple to use. We want a model that's not going to cost a fortune to be able to implement. We want to have it where it's cost effective. And we want comparability. That is, we just don't want it to look at one type of project. We want it to be able to look at a range of projects. That is, it can be used as much for working with selecting a new service as for selecting a new product. So we'll be going through these and making sure that you understand all those different selection criteria. When we take a look at some of the screening and selection issues, we'll be looking at risk. Risk is one of the big things in project, and we'll be talking later on in a lecture that's just dedicated to risk, and we'll be taking a look at the different types. We'll have the commercial side. That is, if we decide to go for this project, such as, for example, an airline buying a new type of aircraft, will it actually help improve our bottom line? Or if it's a new service, will customers be attracted to that service where they'll want to fly with our airline? And so we'll be looking at all the different metrics that come into deciding as to what its market potential is. We'll be looking at internal operating. That is, what changes do we have to make to our organisation if we're to bring this project into play? And then we'll be looking at other factors, such as what's going to be the impact on our image as an organisation? What sort of patents might we get out of it where we get some lead in the market for a certain time? And there are a whole range of other factors that we'll look at. The big thing that we stress, though, is that all models only partially reflect reality. It's often different to be able to predict things that haven't occurred before. And so very often we find that when we come to risk, very often with risk itself, as we'll see in the lecture on risk, there are certain things that we're not even aware of. So we always have to go into screening and selection issues with a fairly open mind. Some of the approaches we look at are, first of all, the fact that organisations use models to fit their need, but what are the types that we can look at? And we'll be taking a look and actually applying some of the principles on what we call a checklist model, simplified scoring model, the analytic hierarchy process, profile models, and financial models. And the financial models are going to be particularly important. We'll spend a lot of time in that area. Let's just have a quick look at some of these. The financial models themselves. One of the things that we look at is the time value of money. For example, one of the things that we always know is that if we have $100 today and we decide rather than investing it in the bank, we put it under our mattress, that in 5 years' time, if we go out with that $100, it won't buy the same as what it does today. That is, money is always eroded by the cost of inflation. And so we're going to be taking a look at this time value of money and applying it in different financial models where we take a look at payback period, net present value, internal rate of return, and the options models. So all of them use this discounted cash flow. That is, the fact that money, its value is eroded over time. Being able to do some of these calculations, you will find, will not only be of great value to you in your future business life, because these models are used out in business, but it can be used by you in your own personal life in planning your financial future. So there's some great value in what we're doing, even though there's a little bit of mathematics. But if you can add, subtract, multiply and divide, you're going to be home and hosed. We're going to look at the checklist model. And we'll give you a problem such as the one that I put here. A company wishes to select a new application package from 4 alternatives for inventory management and shipping control. And we decide to rate them according to different criteria for each project. And we talk about whether we rate it high, medium, low. And in the course itself, you'll actually be able to come up with the answer to this. And then you'll be able to identify, well, what were the advantages of this model, but what are the disadvantages? And we'll look at other models that can provide advantages. We'll use the analytic hierarchy process. And for example, one of the simple problems we use is, how do you go about deciding what sort of car you're going to buy? And we'll use a simple model there and see as to how this can be used in more complex situations. We'll look at net present value, which is the discounted cash flow. And we'll be taking a look at what actually decides as to how the final net present value calculated how it decides as to whether we should either go ahead with the project or say, no, let's scrap it. And we have a little formula there, and it looks a complicated formula, but we'll show you how to use that formula in a way that is so simple that you'll simply say, that is a formula that I can use in taking a look at my own personal finances and calculating where I can be in the future. Great little one to use on superannuation too. So, some of the other ones. We'll look at ones that have been specifically developed by industry. This is one by General Electric, their Tollgate process. A little bit like the systems engineering process, where they start off and say, what are the customer's requirements? What's the proposal we can come up with to meet those requirements? What are the negotiations we then have to sit down to work out any changes between what we're proposing and what the customer wants? How do we then execute systems design itself? How do we do the detailed design, going down to the finest detail? How do we verify that what we've produced is what the customer actually wants and asked for in the first place? And then finally, the production lease itself. Another simple model that is used right throughout industry. So it's very, very practical value that we use. We'll be talking about project portfolio management, the systematic process of selecting and supporting and managing a range of projects. And many organisations have to do this. We're talking about Air Services Australia before, the way in which they have a whole range of projects to manage changes, to update or upgrade the equipment that they're using to provide the airways across Australia. And so what we'll be finding out there is some of the key questions. What projects should we fund? What are the resources we need? How do these projects support our future goals? Does it make good business sense? And is a project complementary to our other company projects? And if it's not, how do we get around that? So in summary, this is a really important lecture. This has got enormous practical value. The theories that we study here will actually apply in many problems. So we actually talk about the 6 criteria in the project and that selection screening model. We explain the employment of checklists and other ways of deciding as to which projects to take on. We apply the various financial models and actually see as to how this helps us make the decision, should we take on this project? And we'll see as to how we can optimise project portfolio management to make sure that they answer all the key questions about how well the project fits within the organisation's strategy and goals for the future. Thank you.